Homeowners of Reddit, what's the most unsettling thing you've discovered upon returning home? One Saturday evening, as the sky was painted with beautiful orange and pink colors, I drove into my driveway, ready to relax. But as I got out of my car, my heart skipped a beat. There, coming out of a side door, was a man with dark hair and a slim build. He was carrying a duffel bag, a briefcase, and a laptop. His calm and confident manner gave me chills. It felt like he had done this 1,000 times before. My mind raced. Who was this stranger, and what was he doing at my house? He didn't even bother calling for Lisa because he knew she wasn't home. He walked straight to the living room, putting his briefcase and laptop on the couch and his garment bag at the bottom of the stairs. After hanging his coat in the closet by the front door, he took off his jacket and tie and unbuttoned the top buttons of his shirt. He had just come back from a regional managers meeting at ABC Industries, even though he wasn't technically a manager but the top systems analyst. His supervisor, who was great at managing staff but clueless about computer systems, insisted that he attend the meeting in Pittsburgh. He had told his wife he'd be back on Monday, claiming that the meeting was followed by weekend seminars. He had his reasons for doing this and didn't want to return too early. Regretting not packing comfortable clothes for the trip, he knew Lisa would have questioned why. Now that he was home, he took a shower and changed into jeans and a polo shirt. After a simple dinner and a beer, he sat in the living room and looked like a husband relaxing after a trip. However, he was dealing with a personal problem. He had already gone through denial and was now facing anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. After tidying up the kitchen past midnight, he realized he was avoiding something important. Unable to figure out an alternative, he threw on a light jacket and made his way to the side door. Suddenly remembering something, he went back to the living room, quickly sent an email from his laptop, and then left the house. 5 minutes later, he drove away from the garage, leaving the door to close behind him. At 7:37 a.m., an emergency operator in Sharpsburg answered a call. "Emergency, what's your emergency?" asked the operator. A young woman's voice responded. "I urgently need the police. I believe a crime has occurred." "Where are you located, ma'am?" the operator asked. "I'm at a payphone on Park Drive near George Washington Park," she replied. Due to the poor connection, the operator inquired, "What crime has been committed, ma'am? Were you attacked or robbed?" The young woman hesitated before responding. The person who called 911 was really worried and said, "Do we need an ambulance? Is anyone hurt?" Luckily, nobody was around, but there was a car with blood inside. The caller was scared and didn't stick around to check things out. They ran to a payphone to call for help. The operator said they did the right thing. "A car is coming to help in less than 10 minutes. Please wait for the officers so you can show them exactly where you are." The caller replied anxiously, "No, I'm not waiting. What if they come after me? I'm going home." She then hung up. The emergency operator felt frustrated as the call ended. "I hope I didn't send the officers in the wrong direction from something more urgent." At about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Detective Peter Nesbitt pulled up to the Evans house. Just as he stepped out of his car, a blonde woman arrived in the driveway. Moving quickly, he approached her. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Mrs. Evans," he said as she pulled a suitcase from the car. "I'm Lisa Evans. Do I know you?" she asked. "No, ma'am, I'm Detective Peter Nesbitt from the Sharpsburg Police. We're trying to locate your husband, Mark Evans. His car was found abandoned in George Washington Park this morning." He showed his badge and ID. Lisa looked concerned but then said, "Mark is in Pittsburgh. He always leaves his car at the airport. You must be mistaken." Detective Nesbitt insisted, "We're sure it's his car. Both the license plate and VIN match his registration." Confused, she walked toward the side door. "If it's his car, it must have been stolen from the airport." "I'm not sure what else I can say," Nesbitt insisted. "When was the last time you spoke to your husband? Could you call him now to confirm that he's in Pittsburgh? Does he have a cell phone you can reach him on?" Lisa stopped, placed her bag down, and began searching through her purse for her phone. "He called me yesterday morning from Pittsburgh. I'll give him a call now." She dialed his number, but then she heard a phone ringing in the detective's pocket. He answered, "Hello, Mrs. Evans." Surprised, she asked, "How did you get Mark's cell phone?" Nesbitt replied, "I can't give it to you. It's evidence of a possible major crime. It was found in your husband's car." Lisa, now more concerned, asked, "Major crime? What do you mean?" "Your husband's car was found with the doors open and a bullet hole. We need to find him to rule him out as a sufferer or suspect. Could you please call Mark's hotel in Pittsburgh?" Lisa asked as she picked up her briefcase. "Sure, the hotel number is in my address book. He always stays at the same Holiday Inn. Come inside and we'll figure this out." Once they were in the kitchen, she quickly found the number and made the call. After hanging up, she turned to the detective in confusion. "Mark's briefcase and laptop are in the living room. I don't understand." The detective, looking pensive, called his colleague. "Hi, Dave, it's Pete. I need a search warrant for the Evans house. We need to confirm whether Mr. Evans is a victim or a suspect." Bring it here ASAP. I'll wait here. He ended the call and took a seat in front of Lisa. A search warrant. Feel free to search wherever you like. Just give us a request. I want you to find my husband. Detective Nesbitt replied. I need to follow protocol. If your husband is engaging in any illegal activities, any evidence discovered without a warrant cannot be presented in court. Lisa, visibly upset, retorted, illegal. Mark isn't involved in anything illegal. He's into computers. Nesbitt inquired, why did he return to town without informing you? Lisa went pale and murmured, oh no, it can't be. She panicked as she said, I don't know why he came back early. All I know is he's not mixed up in anything illegal. Her panic intensified. Mark could be in trouble somewhere. You have to locate him. Detective Nesbitt, speaking more gently, said, we don't have any solid information yet, Mrs. Evans. I need to handle this properly. All our officers are still on the lookout for your husband. Why don't you put on a pot of coffee while we wait for the warrant? His comforting manner reassured Lisa, and she got up to make some coffee. But she felt tense again when he asked, while we have our coffee, could you walk me through the last 48 hours? We need statements from everyone involved. Nesbitt waited a few minutes before requesting a preliminary statement. They sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee while he detailed the condition of Mark's car, mentioning the bullet hole and blood. He explained that the blood indicated a second bullet struck the body, which was found near the car on a pile of firewood, and that the bullet was undergoing examination. The car underwent further inspection, while the medical examiner and forensic scientist continued their work at the scene. Detective David Klein, Nesbitt's partner, showed up with the search warrant and 2 forensic technicians. They commenced a thorough search of the Evans residence, garage, and car. Nesbitt made arrangements with Lisa to obtain Mark's razor and toothbrush for DNA comparison. Seeing how distressed Lisa was, Nesbitt asked her to remain on the couch until the search was completed. After an hour, they decided to only take Mark's briefcase, laptop, and DNA samples. The laptop was password protected. Mrs. Evans, do you happen to know your husband's laptop password? Asked Nesbitt. Lisa tried to help. It used to be his first and last name along with his birth year, Trimark 1971. It should work. However, none of the variations worked. Nesbitt reassured her, our technicians will find a way around it. The items were stored in the forensic van. Nesbitt sat down with Lisa to take her statement. So, Mrs. Evans, I need some basic information about your whereabouts this weekend. Let's start with Saturday morning. Lisa paused for a moment, then began recounting her day. She started by mentioning that on Saturday morning, she tackled some chores around the house. Around 1 or 1:30, Mark called from Pittsburgh, apologizing for not being home. Later, she went shopping until 4:30 and then returned home. After having dinner around 7:30, she headed to a friend's house and ended up staying the night. The following morning, she woke up late, took her time, and finally got home around 2 o'clock. As she spoke, her tension seemed to grow, and she stared at the floor, clenching her fists. Detective Nesbitt finished jotting down notes, closed his notebook, and said, we might need more details later, Mrs. Evans. This is enough for now, but be ready to provide more if needed. He put away his notepad and pen, then got up to help the others look through the garage and car. Before he left, he inquired, do you have any recent full-length photos of your husband? A good headshot would also be helpful. We only have his driver's license photo. He walked over to the fireplace and noticed some wedding photos. Lisa quickly brought a photo album, saying, here are some recent photos, detective. Take your pick. They sat down together, and Nesbitt selected a group photo and a headshot of Mark, commenting, these will be perfect. Lisa handed him the photos, and he inquired, is the man in the photo a relative? If we need a DNA sample, a family member could help if we can't use the razor or toothbrush. Lisa replied, no, that's Blake Moore, Mark's best friend since elementary school. Mark has no nearby relatives. Nesbitt expressed his gratitude to the woman before rejoining the others in the garage. Meanwhile, Lisa, visibly upset, remained seated at the kitchen table. Nesbitt couldn't help but feel sorry for her. Her husband was missing and possibly involved in a serious incident. The fact that she was unaware of his presence in town only added to the mystery. After the detectives and forensic experts completed their search of the garage and car, they discovered bloodstains on the gas and brake pedals of Lisa's car. This finding led them to decide to tow the car for further inspection. As the technicians packed up, the detectives deliberated on the case. Standing by the side door, Nesbitt turned to his partner and asked, what's your take on Mrs. Evans? I have my doubts, especially with the blood in her car. His partner said that the woman seemed worried, but it was too early to be sure. They decided to wait and see how she would react when they told her about the blood and that they were going to tow her car. When they entered the kitchen, Lisa was on her phone and seemed surprised to see them. They told her about finding blood smears in her car and that they were going to tow it for a thorough inspection. Lisa was shocked and denied knowing anything about the blood in her car. Nesbitt replied, we'll need to know how it got there. If it's related to the park incident, we'll push for answers. Also, we'll need the shoes you wore today. I haven't been to the park in weeks. I don't understand how there could be blood in my car. She handed him her shoes and then slumped into a chair, covering her face and sobbing. Both detectives realized they needed more information and said goodbye, leaving Lisa slumped on the kitchen chair. What do you think, Dave? Is she a worried wife or a good actress? Did you notice she was on the phone and hung up quickly? David Klein shook his head. I don't know, Pete. She seems sincere, but if the blood in her car is her husband's, she could be involved. We should talk to their friends and neighbors. Maybe someone knows something. Please commit the following text to memory. She was probably conversing with her closest friend. Yeah, doing some digging might be beneficial. I'm curious about why he returned early. That could be the crucial piece of the puzzle. Detective Nesbitt collected the shoes as evidence. Since they arrived separately, they drove back to the station alone, each grappling with the clues. The remainder of their shift was dedicated to writing reports. The following morning, Peter and Dave showed up early, eager to delve into the case. They were met with forensic and medical examiner reports. It took an hour to go through them. Peter observed, the reports all point in the same direction, but we shouldn't jump to conclusions. Let's explore what else we can find from the computer. In the meantime, we decided to speak with Mark's lawyer and colleagues. David agreed, and together they met with Mark's lawyer, Robert Graham, who was able to spare a few minutes for them. I can't discuss my client's legal situation, said Graham. What do you need? Detective Nesbitt replied, we need to confirm if these emails sent to you from Mark Evans' computer are not just drafts. He handed over 4 pages. The attorney confirmed, these are indeed originals. I acknowledge receipt. The detectives expressed their gratitude and made their way to their car, sharing smiles along the way. While en route to ABC Industrial, Peter remarked, as you pointed out, the spouse is often involved, but we still have a lot of ground to cover. Upon arriving at Mark's workplace, they were directed to his supervisor's office, with Detective Klein taking the lead. We're investigating the discovery of Mark Evans' car in George Washington Park. You may have come across the news, Klein explained. We have some inquiries. Mark's boss assured them of his cooperation, stating, Mark is an indispensable employee. What do you need to know? Firstly, is Mark expected to remain in Pittsburgh until Friday night? He was reportedly attending seminars on Saturday and Sunday. Mark's boss replied that Mark didn't have any plans for the weekend and was expected back on Friday night. When the detectives asked if he noticed anything unusual about Mark recently, his boss mentioned that Mark seemed to be preoccupied and had a lot on his mind. Even though his boss had asked if everything was okay, Mark had reassured him that everything was fine. The detectives thanked the boss and left feeling like they were making progress. Later that morning, the detectives received some initial DNA results and a forensic report, which included a mysterious box with wires. With this new information, they went back to their office, reviewed their notes, and decided to go see Lisa Evans again. They arrived at her house around 3 p.m. without calling ahead to catch her off guard. Lisa was taken aback when she saw them. Detectives, have you found my husband? She asked anxiously. I call the sergeant every 2 hours, and he has nothing to report. Detective Nesbitt replied, no, but we've made some progress. We'd like to ask you a few questions. Lisa, looking embarrassed, nodded and said, sure, come in, I'll do my best to help. In the living room, the detective sat across from her. Detective Klein opened his notebook and asked, is there anything you want to tell us about your relationship with Blake Moore? Lisa turned pale and exclaimed, what? Blake is my husband's best friend. He's just my friend. Detective Nesbitt asked calmly, are you having an affair with Blake Moore? Lisa, looking even paler, stammered, absolutely not. How can you ask me that? The detective stood up. Detective Klein said, we need you to come to the station for a formal statement. Lisa panicked. What? Am I under arrest? Why do I have to go to the station? You're not under arrest yet. We need an official statement. You can have a lawyer if you want, Lisa replied promptly. I don't need a lawyer. I'll come to the station. I'll do whatever it takes to help find Mark. Lisa then escorted the detectives to their car. At the station, they guided her to a dim interrogation room designed to create a negative environment. We'll ask you to wait here while we gather our documents. Are you sure you don't want a lawyer? Detective Nesbitt offered her another chance to decide. She declined, shaking her head, her blue eyes brimming with tears. The detective left the room, ensuring the cameras were on. Detective Klein informed his commanding officer, I want a good recording of everything said. I think we're going to solve this case. Peter Nesbitt approached with files. Let's have a coffee first. Let her have a little time to reflect. The 3 men agreed and spent 20 minutes in the coffee shop discussing the case and planning the interrogation. At the same time, in another part of town, a volunteer at Crime Stoppers took a call. Good morning. This is Crime Stoppers. We incentivize up to $1,000 for information on resolved crimes. This call is being recorded. After a brief silence, an elderly man inquired, "Can I receive a reward for assisting the police?" "It depends on the usefulness of your tip to the police. Do you have any information about a crime?" Another pause, and then the caller asked, "Will I receive the money immediately?" "What if the police deceive me?" "The money doesn't come from the police, so they won't trick you. Provide me with the information, and I'll give you a code number. You can call back in a few days to check if your tip was helpful." The man sounded frustrated. "I need the money right now. I need cash," the man emphasized. "If you require food, I can direct you to shelters." "No, I need money for juice. The kind that costs $5 a bottle," the caller insisted. The volunteer smiled and replied, "If your tip is valuable, you could buy yourself plenty of juice." "Sure, here is the revised text. Sure, I'll wait." I witnessed someone toss a weapon into the river beneath the 3rd Street Bridge on a Sunday morning. The person was carrying a rifle and 2 shovels. When the volunteer inquired, I confirmed that it happened on the east side of the bridge, where the person threw the items off the dock. I can describe the individual. They were large with blonde hair. As for the person's car, it was a dark blue vehicle with a license plate starting with ASSS, though I can't recall the rest. The volunteer assured me that they had all the necessary information and assigned me the number 127. They requested me to call back in a few days, promising to update me on whether my information facilitated the police investigation. The volunteer promptly communicated the details to the police liaison officer. Shortly after, a diver was dispatched and quickly located the items. The weapon was taken to the crime lab, where it was determined to match a recent crime scene in George Washington Park. A report was forwarded to the detectives, and a technician retrieved the 2 shovels from the property clerk. The detectives exited the coffee shop, where a clerk handed them the ballistics and Crime Stoppers reports relevant to the George Washington Park shooting. "We have the weapon used in the shooting," the clerk informed them. "The attached report might help you track down the perpetrator." After reviewing the reports, Klein and Nesbitt split up. "I'll question our suspect in the interrogation room, and you can have a uniformed officer bring in Mr. Moore for questioning," said Klein. "Sounds like a plan, Dave," replied Nesbitt. "Things are falling into place nicely." Klein took the reports and headed to the interrogation room, where Lisa Evans was patiently waiting. Meanwhile, his partner organized for a uniformed officer to visit Blake Moore's house. Shortly after, they were on their way. In the interview room, Lisa remained composed, displaying no signs of fear or sadness. "Sorry to keep you waiting, Mrs. Evans. This room is monitored and recorded," Detective Klein assured her. She replied, "I don't mind. I have nothing to hide." Klein responded, "Good. Let's get started. Are you having an affair with Blake Moore? Yes or no?" Lisa's shoulders slumped, and she looked away, whispering, "Yes." Klein showed her papers from Mark's laptop. "We have proof of your affair," he said. "Your husband knew. He sent these to his attorney, planning a divorce on grounds of infidelity. This map shows your visits to Moore's house." Lisa looked shocked, asking, "How did Mark know?" Klein held up a small device. "He installed this tracker in your car, monitoring your location in real time." She stared at the device, processing the new information. Mark knew for weeks, and he wanted a divorce. She began to cry. Klein, feeling the tension, continued, "Mark documented your interactions with Moore. The last map was from Saturday night when he went missing. He emailed his lawyer saying he was going to confront you and feared he might get arrested." Lisa said, "But Mark never showed up at Blake's. I spent the night there." Klein replied, "Preliminary DNA results show the blood in the park is his. We found the weapon used, linked to your lover. The question is how long you'll cover it up." Lisa insisted. "Blake didn't do anything to Mark. We were together all night." Klein added, "We also found your husband's blood in your car and on your shoes. My partner is picking up Mr. Moore now. Whoever tells us what happened and where to find Mark's body will get a better deal." Lisa was silent, visibly shaken, as Klein gathered the papers and waited for her response. Detective Klein handed Lisa the blood test reports, but she barely glanced at them. "Mark can't be dead. I love him. I need him," she sobbed, clearly very upset. "Blake will confirm this. If Mark was injured in the park, we were not involved." Tears streamed down her face as she sobbed into a crumpled, wet handkerchief. Detective Klein allowed her a few minutes to compose herself. When she appeared calmer, he told her, "There is no doubt that your husband is dead. The medical examiner's report indicated a high probability of the cause of death due to substantial blood loss and the lack of medical treatment in the county." After handing her the report and showing her the photos of the scene, she couldn't help but burst into tears at the sight of the graphic images. "Take a few minutes to gather your thoughts. Denying responsibility won't help you," Klein said. Before leaving the room, he placed the reports on his desk as he walked past his officer, shaking his head in dismay. Klein then went to the break room for a cup of coffee while his commander monitored Lisa in the interrogation room via the camera. Meanwhile, Detective Nesbitt, deeply engrossed in the case, drove to Blake Moore's house, where a patrol car was already present. To his surprise, Blakemore promptly answered the door when Nesbitt arrived. "Yes, officers, how can I help you?" Moore asked, seeing the police. Detective Nesbitt introduced himself. "I'm Detective Nesbitt. We need you to come to the station for questioning about Mark Evans' disappearance." "Mrs. Evans is already there, and we have some questions that require your input." Moore asked, "Am I under arrest? I know Mark is missing, but I don't know how I can help. We have some questions that you might be able to help answer." "Please come with us," Detective Nesbitt assured him. Moore, too stunned to resist, complied and joined them in the unmarked car, sitting in the back as per department protocol. As they headed to the station, Detective Nesbitt turned to his partner and said, "Let's head to the station." Then, he asked Moore, "How well do you know Mrs. Evans?" "She's just Mark's wife to me," replied Moore. "Why do you ask?" Moore inquired. "Just wondering. What do you do, Mr. Moore?" asked Detective Nesbitt. Moore replied, "I run a landscaping company, Moore's Landscaping. We do a lot of commercial work, including projects for the city," relaxing a bit as he spoke. When Moore arrived at the station, he was placed in an interrogation room adjacent to Lisa's. Detective Nesbitt collected Klein's folders and began grilling Moore. At first, Moore denied the affair, but he eventually came clean when faced with evidence from emails and surveillance reports. He confessed that the affair had lasted for almost 4 months but insisted that neither of them had harmed Mark and that they hadn't left his house on the night Mark disappeared. As Nesbitt pressed him further, Moore suggested a new theory. He speculated that if Mark had discovered their affair, he might have flown into a rage or even hired someone to make it look like they were involved. Nesbitt rebutted, "You and I have a history. We have the weapon that was used, a witness who described you and your car, and most of your license plate number. Don't try to suggest that Mark framed you with an elaborate self-destruction." Blakemore was getting visibly upset and insisted, "You don't understand Mark and me. We've been best friends since we were kids. But I've always known better than to get involved with his girlfriends or his wife. Back in high school, I dated one of his girlfriends secretly. When he found out, he scared me, even though I was bigger and stronger. He made it clear that he would seriously hurt me if I ever did it again." The detective, trying to hide a smile, responded, "So, you were afraid of him, but you still got involved with his wife." Blake, now more composed, admitted, "I just couldn't resist her. It had been building up over the years, and a few months ago, I finally made a move. We've been seeing each other since. I can't believe he found out. We were so careful." The detective carefully reviewed the reports. "Affairs often lead to serious consequences. I have a feeling that you and Lisa planned this. You have a choice, you can either be honest or face the maximum penalty." "I didn't hurt Mark. Maybe Lisa did something, but I don't know about it," Blake insisted. The detective warned, "Confess now for leniency. Use your head, Blake." Outraged, Blake denied any involvement. The detective gathered his papers and left, stating, "When criminals work together, one always tries to blame the other. You won't be leaving anytime soon." Outside, the detective found his partner with another report. They discovered that the shovels found in the river belonged to Moore's Landscaping, indicating a link to the suspects. Later, the detectives presented their evidence to the district attorney. Despite lacking a body, the evidence was strong enough to press charges. Half an hour later, Lisa Evans and Blakemore were charged with Mark Evans' homicide. As their Miranda rights were read, they proclaimed their innocence. Following the arraignment, Lisa and Blake were fingerprinted and photographed. As they were led back to their cells, they spoke for the first time since being charged. "Remember the text below, what are we going to do, Blake? They can't believe we did anything to Mark, can they?" Lisa asked, still sniffling. "We need our lawyers, or maybe share one to save money since we're accused of the same thing. But this is all wrong. I think Mark set us up," Blake said, frustrated. "You can't believe that, can you? Why would Mark go to such extremes?" Lisa asked, shocked. "I don't think you knew Mark as well as you thought. I'm amazed he didn't do something drastic when he found out about us." "If I thought he'd find out, I wouldn't have touched you," Blake replied, shaking his head. Blake told Lisa about a past incident when he had secretly dated Mark's girlfriend. Standing by the cell bars, separated by a concrete wall, they could easily talk. "I don't believe Mark would do this. I don't even know how he found out. We were always careful and only met when he was out of town," Lisa said thoughtfully. "I regret betraying him. Even if he's not dead, I want a divorce," she added, her voice trailing off with emotion. Blake listened to her sobs and said, "Lisa, stop it. You knew the risks when you came to my house. You were aware of the consequences." She quieted down and said softly, "You're right. I just hope he forgives me." After a brief pause, Lisa proposed, "I could reach out to Robert Graham, our attorney. Maybe he can represent both of us, and we can split the costs." They agreed, and Lisa flagged down an officer to make the call. However, Robert Graham declined due to his involvement in Mark's divorce proceedings and instead recommended his colleague Basil Smith. Lisa agreed, and Smith was on his way. Blake was relieved to hear this and thanked Lisa. They waited in their cells until Basil Smith, an experienced lawyer, arrived. The introductions were brief, and Smith reviewed the charges. "So, you're both charged with Mark Evans' homicide. What did the officers tell you?" Smith asked. "Mrs. Evans, you first." "Just the main points." Lisa recounted her story, ending in tears. "I had nothing to do with it. I love Mark. I couldn't hurt him." Smith then turned to Blake. "Your turn," briefly. Blake summarized his experience, asserting, "We had nothing to do with Mark's disappearance. I think Mark organized this to frame us." Sensing the urgency, Smith said, "We need to focus on getting you both out of here. Remember this, bail is likely to be set at $100,000 each." "Will that be a problem?" Lisa, shocked, asked. "Do I need $100,000 for bail?" "No, just 10% or $10,000 cash for the bail bond," Smith reassured her. They agreed they could handle the bail and were eager to be released. Smith informed them, "You'll be arraigned tomorrow morning. Bail will be set then, and you'll make arrangements to get out." "Prepared to spend the night here," the lawyer said. Both clients reacted badly to the statement. He explained he couldn't do more until charges were filed. Once they were out, he would talk to the district attorney to unseal the evidence and better understand their case. They were taken back to their cells, where neither slept well. Given greasy takeout food, a single blanket, and loud cellmates. The next morning at 10 o'clock, they met with their attorney before the court. Despite their disheveled appearance, they entered their pleas of not guilty, and bail was set at $100,000. Blake, owning a home and business, quickly negotiated a $10,000 bond and was released by early afternoon. Lisa was less fortunate. After discovering she didn't own her home and her savings account was empty, she had to ask her parents for help. It took a lot of convincing, but they finally agreed to lend her $10,000. Unfortunately, this delay meant spending another night in jail, this time with two intoxicated strangers. The following day, after sorting out the financial issues, she was released. When she got home, she took a shower and ignored incoming calls. The next month flew by. Lisa found out that Mark had taken out the money from their account to protect his share before their divorce. She received the divorce papers not knowing what he did with the cash. Lisa and Blake met with Basil Smith several times. Smith received copies of the evidence and intended to meet with the district attorney to have the charges dismissed, arguing that it would be difficult to obtain a conviction without a body or witness. He suggested hiring a private investigator to look into whether Mark had orchestrated his disappearance. Blake agreed, but Lisa believed Mark was the victim of a failed carjacking. Over the next few weeks, the investigator found nothing. He attempted to locate the informer who reported the abandoned rifle and shovels, but no one recognized the voice from the call. The tipster never followed up, deepening the mystery. Meanwhile, tensions between Lisa and Blake continued to grow. After being released, Blake proposed continuing their affair, but Lisa refused, holding him responsible for her predicament. "I only want to deal with you in court," she tearfully declared. Blake's response was indifferent. "Suit yourself, Lisa. There are plenty of other women around." They only communicated through their lawyer, keeping their distance otherwise. Their once passionate affair had turned entirely cold. A month after being released, Basil Smith set up a meeting with District Attorney Jeff Bagden. Lisa and Blake were hopeful that the charges would be dropped, as they had faced uncomfortable questions about their relationship. They screened calls using caller ID and answering machines, eager to clear their names and move on. During the meeting, Jeff Bagden, surprisingly young and stylish, delivered unexpected news. "I've just received the final reports from the medical examiner and police," he began. "Based on the evidence, I'm offering a reduced sentence of 8 to 12 years for a guilty plea to second-degree homicide." Lisa and Blake were stunned and vehemently proclaimed their innocence. Their attorney attempted to calm them down and asked Bagden how he justified the offer. Bagden explained, "We have new evidence. The DNA from blood on your car's license plate and trunk gasket matches Mark Evans. Additionally, the black polyethylene found under Mark's car matches material from your landscaping business." "Lisa, Blake, what have you done?" Blake exploded. "You know I had nothing to do with it. You were with me when it happened." Basil Smith stepped in to defuse the situation and assure both parties. Turning to Bagden, he said, "Please excuse my client's reaction. We were hopeful that the charges would be dropped, and your statement took them by surprise." Bagden, with a hint of amusement, responded, "I understand, but we have sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. The medical examiner's report confirms that the victim lost too much blood to survive. The crime scene suggests the body was dragged and loaded into a car. The prosecution is confident." Bagden handed in the reports and then left. Lisa and Blake quickly spoke with Smith, who instructed them to keep quiet. "I understand you're shocked. Don't turn against each other. We have to come up with a defense. Are you considering rejecting the plea deal?" Both of them turned down the deal, fully convinced that they would not be found guilty. Smith agreed to get ready for the trial. After they departed, Smith carefully examined the reports, questioning the honesty of his clients. Despite his uncertainties, he was committed to defending them. Months later, the trial commenced. Judge Robert Cox started the trial at 10 a.m. on Monday. Basil Smith sat between Lisa and Blake to help them get along. They couldn't afford separate lawyers. Blake's business was struggling, and Lisa had left her job because of the stress from the trial and difficulties with her missing husband's friends. District Attorney Jeff Bagden began by telling the members of the jury that they didn't have Mark Evans' body, but they intended to prove he was dead and that the defendants were guilty of his murder. He said that the people being sued had a romantic relationship, which Mark Evans found out about. This prompted him to start the process of getting a divorce. It wasn't clear how or when Mark learned about the affair, but evidence from his computer showed that he knew when and where they had met. The emails show that he was keeping track of their activities, getting financially ready for the divorce, and planning to confront them. We don't know exactly when they met, but we do know what happened. Evidence suggests that they met at Mr. Moore's house, where Mr. Evans was unable to act, was put in the passenger seat, and then driven to George Washington Park. There, he was shot in the upper chest while likely unconscious. He was dragged from the car, thrown to the ground, and shot again, this time striking his carotid artery. Graphic photos will show his final moments. At this point, Lisa Evans lost her composure, requiring Judge Cox's intervention to restore order. Bagden continued, after the second shot, Mr. Evans was wrapped in plastic, dragged from the site, and loaded into Mr. Moore's trunk. He was driven to an unknown location and buried. The murder weapon and shovels were thrown into the river, but a concerned citizen came forward and alerted the police, leading to their recovery. Forensic analysis confirmed that the defendants were present at the crime scene. Mr. Evans' blood was discovered on Mr. Moore's car and Lisa Evans' shoes. Bagden concluded by saying that the defense would assert they were not at the scene and would rely on each other's alibis. I am confident that you will be able to see through this and find them guilty. Basil Smith countered by emphasizing the presumption of innocence and urging the jury to focus on the evidence. Despite his efforts, the district attorney's statement had a strong impact. During the trial, a computer expert, as the first witness, discussed the emails and maps that Mark Evans had been using to monitor his wife's meetings with Mr. Moore. According to the expert, the tracking device, which was detailed in a letter from Mark to his lawyer, consistently recorded the locations and times. This evidence seemed to make Lisa Evans uncomfortable, while Blake Moore seemed uninterested. During Smith's cross-examination, very little new information was revealed, as the evidence from the device and emails was indisputable. Reporters were taking detailed notes, particularly focusing on the tracking device, as they anticipated that it would be of great interest to their readers. After a lengthy lunch break, the trial resumed, featuring testimony from the emergency operator and two patrolmen who were the first to respond to the incident. They gave simple information about finding Mark Evans' car without any drama. The trial's intensity rose when detectives and medical examiners described the crime scene, supported by large, graphic photographs showing bullet holes, blood, and drag marks. The medical examiner detailed the blood loss, estimating 3 to 4 pints, and described blood jets indicating a severed artery. He came to the conclusion that Mark Evans was dying, at which point Lisa Evans lost control and exclaimed, "No, Mark can't be dead." Her emotional outburst led to the trial being adjourned until the following morning. The second day began with the medical expert continuing his testimony, focusing on blood sample tests. After 15 minutes, DA Jeff Bagden concluded his questioning, handing over the witness to defense attorney Basil Smith. Smith made sure Lisa Evans was calm and sedated. He aimed to counter the dramatic impression of the shooting. Smith asked if Mark Evans might have lost 1 to 2 pints of blood instead of 3 to 4, depending on blood distribution. The medical examiner said it's unlikely but not impossible. Smith then inquired if first aid could have reduced Mark Evans' injuries' severity. The examiner said immediate medical attention would have been necessary. Smith pointed out the lack of evidence for immediate assistance and dismissed the witness after securing small concessions. Next, a forensic scientist specializing in weapons and ammunition testified about 2 recovered bullets. One bullet was deformed, and the other, taken from firewood, was in good condition and matched the recovered weapon. During the trial, the technician mentioned that there were minimal traces of blood on the bullets, but they were probably wiped clean as they passed through layers of padding and fabric. The bullets had a type of coating that made it difficult to trace the weapon they came from, so it seemed unlikely that the weapon could be identified. It was also mentioned that 20 years ago, a similar weapon was sold at a weapons show without any buyer record. Additionally, shovels found at the scene were traced back to a landscaping company, but there were no fingerprints or DNA found on them. The cross-examination didn't reveal any new information, but it was mentioned that there was blood found in someone's car. The technician admitted the blood could have been planted by a third party, giving Smith a small victory. Things were complicated with testimony from the technician at Lisa Evans' home. Blood was found in her car and on her right shoe. The technician acknowledged that they couldn't determine whether the blood had been transferred from the shoe to the gas pedal or vice versa. The lawyer hoped that this uncertainty would work in Lisa's favor. After the prosecution's witnesses concluded, the defense began presenting its evidence on the third morning. Local newspapers speculated that the defense might face challenges in countering the prosecution's evidence. They suggested that securing a conviction would be hard without a body, particularly considering the defense's tactic of casting doubt on whether Mark Evans was truly deceased. Basil Smith's first defense witness was blood analysis expert Dr. Wilbur, who testified that a better job could have been done in collecting blood evidence. It's important to note that analyzing the soil with blood on it could have helped to provide a better estimate of how much blood was lost. He believed as little as 1.5 pints of blood could have created the scene, and someone losing that much blood could still be alive. The district attorney did not cross-examine him. During his testimony, Blakemore professed his innocence and suggested that Mark may have orchestrated his murder. He claimed that he never possessed a weapon and implied that the shovels found could have been stolen from his work sites. Basil Smith kept Moore's testimony brief, turning him over for cross-examination. Jeff Bagden questioned Moore, asking why he believed Mark Evans would plan his murder. Moore recounted a past incident where Mark had threatened him in high school after Blake dated Mark's girlfriend behind his back. Bagden then insinuated that this wasn't the first time Moore had interfered with Mark's relationships and pondered whether Mark would have targeted Moore if he wanted to destroy someone. Moore couldn't directly answer the question, expressing that his physical advantage over Mark would have deterred any confrontation. Bagden also probed Moore about his relationship with Mark's wife, insinuating that Moore may have intimidated Mark into taking his own life and then felt comfortable pursuing a relationship with Mark's wife. The prosecutor interjected, suggesting that Moore's actions reflected narcissistic behavior, portraying him as someone who believed he could pursue any woman and disregard friendship. Basil Smith objected, arguing that the prosecutor was making statements rather than asking questions. The judge agreed and told the jury to ignore the prosecutor's last statement. Despite this, Blake appeared visibly upset but didn't say anything else before leaving the stand. Basil Smith realized that Blake's testimony had backfired, but hoped that Lisa's testimony might help. Lisa, looking more composed, emphatically stated that she wasn't involved in any attack on her husband and suggested that he might have been carjacked. Basil decided not to ask any more questions. The prosecutor asked Lisa, "Where were you between midnight Saturday and 2 p.m. Sunday?" Lisa, feeling embarrassed, replied, "I was with Blake Moore at his house from 8 p.m. Saturday until about 1:30 p.m. Sunday." "You didn't quite answer the question. Tell us what you did from midnight Saturday to Sunday." The prosecutor pressed. Lisa, flustered, said, "I was in Blake's bedroom at midnight. We were, doing it." "And how long did this last?" the prosecutor asked. "Probably until after 1 a.m., Lisa admitted, feeling embarrassed. "What happened next?" he inquired. "We dozed off until around 5:45 a.m., she replied. "Was Mr. Moore still in bed when you woke up?" he asked. "Yes, he was," she confirmed. "We drifted back to sleep around 6:30, and then we woke up at 11 a.m., Lisa recounted hurriedly. "So you woke him up to do it again at 6:30, the prosecutor clarified. Lisa, embarrassed, replied, "No, he was already ready." The prosecutor, seeing the jury's reaction, continued. "Tell us exactly how you woke him up." Lisa resigned, and said, "I just started doing it with him." The prosecutor moved in for the final blow. "You professed your love for your husband. Is that genuine?" After Lisa's unwavering affirmation, he pressed on, mentioning that you had spent the night with his closest friend while he ended his own life. After a long morning in court, Lisa found herself unable to respond when accused of being involved in the unfortunate events surrounding the end of his life. The judge mercifully called for a lunch break, providing a moment of relief for Lisa. Over lunch, her attorney Basil Smith cautioned that the case could swing in either direction. Privately, he harbored doubts, particularly as both defendants had stumbled during their testimonies. The afternoon session ended swiftly with Smith declaring no further defense witnesses. Both legal teams readied their closing statements. The prosecutor underscored the substantial evidence against the defendants, while the defense emphasized the case's circumstantial nature, the absence of a body, and the lack of a clear motive. By 4 p.m., the case was handed over to the jury, who deliberated for 2 hours before adjourning for the night. The next morning, Lisa and Blake anxiously waited at Basil Smith's office for the jury's decision. Putting aside their differences, they shared a conference room, hoping for an acquittal. At 3:30 p.m., a call arrived, signaling that the jury had reached a verdict. Lisa's parents, who had come into town for the trial, were also present at the courthouse. After a swift verdict, they were found guilty of second-degree homicide. Lisa couldn't hold back her tears, and Blake expressed his frustration by pounding his fist. Handcuffed and taken into custody, Lisa managed to briefly speak to her parents, adamantly proclaiming her innocence. The period between the conviction and the sentencing seemed to drag on. Lisa's parents visited her daily, while Blake only received one visit from a cousin. During the sentencing, they both received a 15-year-to-life sentence. Basil Smith promised to thoroughly review the court records for any possibility of an appeal. Within 3 days, they were transferred to state prison. Lisa's prison had a decent reputation, but Blake's prison had a history of riots. Once the trial ended, media coverage died down, and Lisa Evans and Blake Moore slowly faded from public attention. A few months later, Basil Smith and Jeff Bagden met for a drink. As they reflected on the case, Smith expressed his surprise at the convictions, noting that the defendants' consistent stories suggested innocence. Bagden said that the jury didn't buy their story. "I usually try to stay objective about these cases unless they involve extremely awful crimes or children. This one wasn't the worst, but it didn't evoke much compassion for the defendants." A year later, there was news about a big fight at Blake Moore's prison. He had been stabbed during the riot and taken to the hospital with a collapsed lung. It was serious, but he was expected to make it. 18 months after Lisa Evans and Blake Moore were found guilty of Mark Evans' murder, Basil Smith rarely thought about the case. He had spent the first year going through transcripts but didn't find any legal basis for an appeal. Then, one quiet Wednesday morning at the New York office of the Innocence Project, the receptionist received a FedEx package. In it, there was a DVD, a sealed biohazard bag, and a multi-page letter. Curious, she asked Tony Kelly, a young lawyer, to take a look. Tony, dressed casually, brought the package to his office. He had been doing legal research at the Innocence Project for a year and found it rewarding to help those who were wrongfully convicted. Sitting at his desk, he began to read the letter. The letter to the Innocence Project was about Lisa Evans and Blake Moore's convictions. "I don't know where to begin, so I'll start from the start. My name isn't crucial, but I have information that could impact the lives of the 2 convicted individuals and 5 others, including myself. About 15 months ago, a man responded to my ad for a computer-savvy person. He knew as much, if not more, about business networks than I did. I hired him on the spot. This man, who I'll refer to as Mark, was reserved but exceptionally skilled. Within 2 months, my business expanded by 50% due to his efforts and long hours. When Mark began working for me, he had just arrived in town and hadn't found a place to rent yet. Since my business was new, I rented him our basement room for extra income. I wanted to reinvest profits into the business to support me and my young son. Although it was a risk, something about Mark convinced me he was not a threat. We quickly settled into a routine. For the first 3 months, he lived in the basement but ate with us and commuted together. He often put in extra hours without pay, preferring productivity over TV or sleep. Throughout our journey, our connection shifted from a professional one to a friendship and eventually blossomed into a loving family. My son now sees him as a father figure. Right from the beginning, I sensed that Mark carried a heavy burden. One serene afternoon, I discreetly closed the office door and asked him in, determined to uncover what was troubling him. He eventually opened up about fleeing from a failed marriage. His wife had betrayed him with a close friend, and he had nearly succumbed to despair because of it. Our conversation helped him come to terms with his past. Initially, we kept our relationship to weekends only, maintaining our separate roles during the week. After a month, he moved from the basement into my bedroom, and we formed a family unit. Nevertheless, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still holding something back. Our bond continued to strengthen, and Mark assumed the role of a father to my son, who yearned for a caring dad. 4 days ago, Mark collapsed at work and was diagnosed with a heart condition necessitating surgery. Once his condition stabilized, he was transferred to a private room where he unraveled his story, fearing it would be lost if he didn't make it through the surgery. He confided in me over a day. When I agreed to share his story with you, he seemed to experience a sense of relief. Our relationship transitioned from being strictly employer-employee to being close friends, and eventually to being like a loving family. My son now calls him Dad. From the beginning, I could sense that Mark was deeply troubled. One calm afternoon, I shut the office door and called him in, determined to uncover what was bothering him. Eventually, he confessed that he was trying to escape from a failed marriage. His wife had betrayed him with a close friend, and he nearly succumbed to self-destruction because of it. Our conversation helped him come to terms with his past. We started seeing each other on weekends while maintaining separate roles during the week. After a month, he moved from the basement and joined me in my bedroom, and we became a family. Despite this, I felt that he was still keeping something hidden. Our relationship blossomed, and Mark became a father figure to my son, who needed a loving dad. 4 days ago, Mark collapsed at work and was diagnosed with a heart condition requiring surgery. Once stabilized, he was moved to a private room where he opened up about his story, fearing it would die with him if he didn't survive the surgery. He shared this with me over a day. When I agreed to share his story with you, he seemed relieved. As he rests, I'm writing this letter with our son sleeping next to him. I have to finish this tonight, make a DVD, and send everything to you by noon tomorrow, making sure it can't be linked back to us. Mark's story began almost 2 years ago. He was happily married to Lisa for almost 6 years when he noticed a small bruise on her right breast. Initially, he thought it was from bumping into furniture, but he realized it looked more like a love bite. Knowing it wasn't from him, he spent the night troubled by different scenarios of how the bruise got there. These thoughts lingered with him the next day at work. By the time he reached his office, he felt foolish for his suspicions. He had no evidence of wrongdoing and thought it was all circumstantial. Just before lunch, the parts delivery manager brought him a tracking device to evaluate for improving the delivery service. Mark quickly decided how to test it. 3 days after installing the device in his wife's car, he checked the monitor while at work. Now, as he sleeps, I'm typing this letter with our son asleep beside him. I need to finish this tonight, create a DVD, and send everything to you by noon tomorrow, ensuring it can't be traced back to us. Mark's story began almost 2 years ago. He was happily married to Lisa for nearly 6 years when he noticed a small bruise on her right bosom. Initially thinking it was from bumping into furniture, he realized it looked more like a love bite. Knowing it wasn't from him, he spent the night troubled by various scenarios of how the bruise got there. These thoughts stayed with him the next day at work. By the time he got to his office, he felt foolish for his suspicions. He had no evidence of wrongdoing and thought it was all circumstantial. Just before lunch, the parts delivery manager brought him a tracking device to evaluate for improving the delivery service. Mark quickly decided how to test it. 3 days after installing the device in his wife's car, he checked the monitor while at work. She had told him she was going shopping, but the tracker indicated that she went to Blake Moore's house instead. An hour later, her car was still parked there. Feeling suspicious, he decided to give her a call. When she insisted she was out shopping, he knew something wasn't right. That evening, he endured her false story about shopping, feeling sick to his stomach, but chose not to jump to conclusions. He kept an eye on her for another week while he was away on a business trip, tracking her car across 3 states to Blake's house from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. It became apparent that she had lied about being at home the entire night. The confirmation of her infidelity utterly devastated him. Upon his return, he contemplated wreaking havoc. He had always known that Blake was a womanizer, but he never imagined that he would pursue Lisa. Her betrayal shattered his heart. That night, he paid a visit to the elderly widow next door under the pretext of borrowing a wrench. From her late husband's toolbox, he retrieved a hidden revolver. Mark intended to use it to get rid of Blake and Lisa, and then himself. However, he decided to wait until he caught them together. He decided to swap out his tracking device for the one he was testing. Fortunately, Lisa and Blake didn't meet for another week, which gave Mark time to reconsider his actions. During that time, he came up with a new plan, to set them up for a serious crime. He spent a week carefully planning and gathering the necessary supplies. When everything was in place, he pretended to go on a business trip for the weekend, knowing they would meet while he was away. When his wife went to see Blake, he put his plan into action by creating a trail of evidence that made it seem like he was planning to divorce her. He almost forgot to send a crucial email to his lawyer that would incriminate Lisa and Blake. Before he left, he shot his car's passenger seat and a wooden block in the garage to muffle the sound with a blanket. This was a relief for him as it marked the beginning of his revenge. Search for old newspaper articles online. Mark kept up with the trial every day and said most of the story was recorded by court reporters. He believes that a thorough review of the court transcript will bring clarity to the situation. To start his plan, he drove to a park near Blake's house and located a secluded area. Carrying a large gym bag containing all the necessary materials, he spread them out on a picnic table, covering it with an old blanket. He then unloaded firewood, plastic sheeting, and a spare tire, creating a trail leading to the paved road. Afterward, he returned the tire to the trunk and arranged the firewood strategically. Using a small flashlight, he completed these tasks and then sat quietly to observe if anyone would notice. Mark drew blood from his hand using a needle, collecting nearly 2 pints, which he diluted with distilled water. He sprayed this blood in patterns to mimic an arterial jet and smeared it on the car seat and ground to suggest a significant blood loss. He filled bullet holes in the firewood and car upholstery with more blood. After finishing, he packed everything in his gym bag and left the park, reaching an old car he had bought for the purpose. Dizzy from blood loss, he rested until nearly 6 a.m., then drove to Blake's house to finish his plan. Lisa's car was still at Blake's house and unlocked, so he put a couple of drops of blood on the gas pedal. He also smeared blood on Blake's car but got scared when he saw a light on in Blake's bedroom. He quickly left, went to a payphone, and used a voice changer to report his car in the park, pretending to be a woman. He then disposed of 2 shovels and the revolver in the river. After feeling completely exhausted, he checked into a motel for a couple of days, where he relied on supplements and energy bars to keep going. He used a voice changer to make another call, posing as an old man, and this helped the police locate the revolver. Mark confided in me about this entire ordeal because he's determined to distance himself from his past as Mark Evans. He now goes by a different identity, a name known only to my son and me, and he wants to keep it that way. He asked me to share this information to help clear the names of Lisa Evans and Blake Moore of their convictions. Tomorrow, I'll grab a copy of the New York Times and an inkwell. We plan to lift Mark's fingerprints from a bloodstained section of the front page, which will be compared with the DNA found at the park. This evidence should prove that he is alive, and hopefully, it will secure their release from jail. Towards the end of the letter, there was a handwritten message stating that Mark emerged from surgery in good condition. He has asked me to travel to Seattle tomorrow to deliver this package. I don't like leaving him, but I know it will give him peace of mind. We're expecting twins in about 3 months. Tony Kelly finished reading the document and looked for any additional information, but there was none. He put down the papers and examined the other items in the package. There was a DVD labeled, "Photos taken in George Washington Park," and a black plastic envelope marked, "Fingerprints and DNA." He looked through the papers again for any extra information and then called a senior attorney. This situation was beyond his ability to handle alone. It didn't take long to confirm that the DNA belonged to Mark Evans, and the fingerprints matched those found in his car in the park, proving he was still alive. With undeniable evidence that 2 people were convicted of a homicide that never happened, the state attorney general and governor rushed to secure their release. A week later, they returned to the courtroom with Basil Smith, Lisa's parents, and even District Attorney Jeff Bagden. Some state representatives were also present, and the state attorney general apologized for the wrongful conviction. He blamed Mark Evans for misleading the justice system and announced efforts to find him and hold him accountable for the financial costs incurred. When asked where they would start looking for Mark, he could only shake his head. Blakemore seemed changed, no longer arrogant, but more inclined to compromise. He apologized to Lisa for the events leading to their imprisonment. Lisa seemed uninterested, eager only to leave with her parents. Both Basil Smith and the district attorney expressed regret, admitting they had been deceived by Mark Evans. They promised to be more thorough in future cases. Even though the state found no fault, Lisa and Blake were each awarded $50,000 in compensation. Blake, whose business went under and the house was sold to cover legal expenses, left town. He told Lisa that Mark had seriously harmed them and that the check was only a small fraction of what he had lost. Lisa, visibly exhausted from her ordeal, simply said they deserved it and left without saying goodbye. 2 weeks after their release was reported by cable news, a large envelope arrived at Basil Smith's office. Inside was a note for the attorney and a sealed envelope for Lisa. Basil handed the letter to Lisa at her apartment. After a short conversation, he left her with the envelope, which she opened nervously. Seeing Mark's handwriting, she read the letter. "Lisa, I'm truly sorry for the time you spent in jail. Your betrayal of Blake nearly drove me insane. However, my new life and happiness have made me realize that freeing you both was necessary for my freedom. The authorities may search for me, but I am confident in my new life with my new family. Good luck and goodbye, M." The letter slipped from her hand, crushing any remaining hope of reconciliation with Mark. Hey there, amazing people. Get ready to smash that subscribe button on the YouTube channel and hit the bell icon to turn on notifications. Thank you so much for tuning in. I can't wait to catch you in the next video. Stay awesome.